CIET NCERT presents the audiobook Exploring Society, India and Beyond, textbook of social science for class 6.
Chapter 4 Timeline and Sources of History, page 59. History is an unending dialogue between the present and the past, between the society of today and the society of yesterday. We can fully understand the present only in the light of the past. E. H. Carr. Here we have the picture of National Museum, New Delhi. Such museums preserve objects from the past, such as statues, coins, and ornaments, all of which help us understand our history. The big questions: 1. How do we measure historical time? 2. How can various sources help us understand history? 3. How did early humans live? Page 60. How do we learn about the past? Think about it. What is the earliest memory you can recollect? Do you remember how old you were at that time? Those memories together are a part of your past, maybe going 5 or 6 years back. How do you think understanding the past will help us understand the present world? You will discover in science that the earth has a very, very long history, of which we humans occupy only a tiny part, the most recent one. History is the study of the human past. Here, in figure 4.1, we can observe the timeline of a few important stages in the evolution of life on Earth. It ranges from few years ago all the way to billions of years ago. The picture shows us the evolution of life on Earth starting from 4.54 billion years ago, when Earth came into picture. The first cells also arrived on the horizon somewhere around that time. About 2.33 billion years ago, atmospheric oxygen arrived on the horizon. The first bacteria evolved into existence around 1 billion years ago. Moving forward, around 700 million years ago, we had sponges and fungi and corals on the Earth. About 500 million years ago, fish and vertebrates were seen on Earth for the first time. The same period also saw insects and amphibians coming into existence, as well as sharks. About 300 million years ago, reptiles, dinosaurs came into existence. Birds and mammals came into horizon a bit late, somewhere around 100 to 150 million years ago, the same time when flowers and bees were formed. It was much, much later, that is, in the recent past. Around 10 million years ago, primates were seen on the horizon. About 1 million years ago, fire was discovered. Around 300 lakh years ago, Homo sapiens came into existence. And then, very recently, just about 6,500 years ago, writing was discovered. Page 61. Many people study the history of the earth. Some of them are trained to uncover the secrets left beneath the earth's surface and help us learn about its past, and also our past. Here we have 4 different pictures, figures 4.2.1 all the way to figure 4.2.4. They show geologists, paleontologists, anthropologists, and archaeologists on their jobs. Observe these 4 pictures and the activities involved. From top left, geologists. Figure 4.2.1. Study the physical features of the earth like the soil, stones, hills, mountains, rivers, seas, oceans, and other such parts of the earth. Paleontologists. Figure 4.2.2. Study the remains of plants, animals, and humans from millions of years ago in the form of fossils. Fossils are impressions of footprints or parts of plants or animals that are found preserved within layers of soil or rocks. Anthropologists. Figure 4.2.3. Study human societies and cultures from the oldest times to the present. Archaeologists. Figure 4.2.4. Study the past by digging up remains that people, plants, and animals left behind, such as tools, pots, beads, figurines, toys, bones, and teeth of animals and humans. burnt grains, parts of houses or bricks, among others. How is time measured in history? Each society and culture has had its own ways of measuring time. Major events, such as the birth of an important person or the start of a ruler's reign, have often marked the beginning of a new era. Era is a distinct period of time. At present, the Gregorian calendar is commonly used worldwide, side by side. Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Chinese, and other calendars are also used for calculating the dates of festivals and other auspicious events. Gregorian calendar is the calendar now used the world over. It has 12 months, adding up to 365 days, and a leap year every 4 years. However, century years, for example 1800, 1900, 2000, are leap years only if they are multiples of 400. So, in the 3 centenary years above, only 2000 is a leap year. Auspicious is favorable or bringing luck, for instance, an auspicious beginning. In the West, the conventional year for Jesus Christ's birth has generally been taken to be the starting point for this calendar. Years are counted forward from this point and used to be marked with AD, an abbreviation for a Latin phrase that refers to the years after Jesus' birth. However, this is now called the Common Era or CE across the world. For example, 1947, the year India gained independence, can be written as 1947 AD, sometimes AD 1947 or 1947 CE. Similarly, the years before the conventional date for the birth of Jesus are counted backward and used to be marked with BC or before Christ. They are now called Before Common Era or BCE. For example, 560 BCE is an approximate year of birth of Gautam Buddha, whom we will meet in chapter 7. The bottom of the page shows figure 4.3, timeline of some main events since 300,000 BCE. It starts around 14,000 BCE, goes up to 40,000 BCE, and all the way to 300,000 BCE. The Ice Age comes between 14,000 and 40,000 BCE, and 40,000 BCE was the era when first examples of rock art in the world were discovered. Page 63. Can you calculate how many years ago that was? Let's explore. Such calculations are simple, but there is a catch. In the Gregorian calendar, there is no year 0. The year 1 CE follows immediately the year 1 BCE. Draw a simple timeline marking every year from 2 BCE to 2 CE. You will see that because of the absence of a year 0, only 3 years have passed between those two dates. So, to calculate the number of years between a BCE date and a CE date, you should add them but subtract 1. In the above case, 2 plus 2 minus 1 is equal to 3. Practice a few examples with your classmates. For example, to return to the question about the Buddha, suppose we are now in the year 2024 CE. Then, the Buddha was born 560 plus 2024 minus 1, which is equal to 2583 years ago. On the bottom of the page we have a picture, a timeline in history, starting at 12,000 BCE, which was the end of last ice age. We then move to 10,000 BCE, similarly to 8,000 BCE, when first settlements and beginning of agriculture happened. Moving forward, at 6,000 BCE, pottery technology in Indian subcontinent came into light. 2,000 years more, 4,000 BCE witnessed beginning of copper metallurgy. Also, the world's first cities in Mesopotamia were discovered. 2000 BCE was the time for Indus-Saraswati civilization. And then, moving on the timeline, we come to the point which witnessed birth of the Buddha. Also nearby happened the birth of Jesus. And Ashoka was also born at this time. Moving forward, we reach 2000 CE, and that is where we are right now. Page 64. A timeline, refer to figure 4.3 on pages 62 and 63, is a convenient tool to mark such events, as it shows a sequence of dates and events covering any particular period. It runs from the beginning of humanity to the present, with a few important landmarks. Note that the dotted portion marks a skipped period. Otherwise, this timeline would have to be almost 3 meters long. Here we have another depiction of the timeline, moving from past all the way to future. Somewhere down the line we see birth of the Buddha at 560 BCE, and then Jesus' birth, and then at present 2000 CE shows us the present world. What holds in the future? A timeline also helps in understanding the order in which historical events take place. For example, even without looking at dates, you can now see that the birth of Buddha occurs before that of Jesus. Don't miss out. Along with a year and a decade, that is, a period of 10 years, we often use other terms to understand longer durations of time. Two of these are quite commonly used when learning about history. One, century. It is any period of 100 years. In history, specific centuries are counted every 100 years, starting from the year 1 CE. For instance, we are currently in the 21st century CE, which runs from 2001 to 2100. Page 65. The centuries BCE are calculated beginning from the year 1 BCE and keep going back in time. For example, the 3rd century BCE would include the years 300 BCE to 201 BCE. 2. Millennium. It is any period of 1000 years. In history, specific centuries are counted every 1000 years from the year 1 CE. For instance, we are currently in the 3rd millennium CE, which began in 2001 CE and will go up to 3000 CE. As with centuries, millenniums BCE are also calculated beginning from 1 BCE and go backwards. So the first millennium BCE would include the years 1 BCE to 1000 BCE. In the timeline given on pages 62 and 63, that is figure 4.3, can you mark the beginning of the 8th millennium BCE? Note, in English, the plural of millennium is millenniums or millennia. Both are correct. Let's explore. Create a timeline stretching from 1900 CE to the current year and place the dates of birth of your grandparents, parents, siblings, and yourself. Also mark the years that the 20th century CE begins with and ends with. Don't miss out. Do you know how calendars have been traditionally made in India? Many Indian calendars rely on the positions of the sun and the moon to define the months of the year. A panchang is a book of tables which lists the days of each month along with related astronomical data. For instance, it precisely predicts events like solar and lunar eclipses, times for sunrise and sunset, etc. Panchangas, still widely used in India, often also give weather predictions for the year, dates and timings of festivals, and more. Page 66. What are the sources of history? Let's explore. Source of history is a place, person, text, or an object from which we gather information about some past event or period. Can you collect information about at least 3 generations of your family on your mother's and father's sides? Create a family tree with your parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. Find out their names, what they did for a living, and where they were born. Also write the sources from where you got this information. Here is a table with 5 columns. Column 1, relation, grandparents, paternal, grandparents, maternal, great-grandparents, paternal, great-grandparents, maternal. Column 2, name. Column 3, occupation. Column 4, place of birth. Column 5, source of information. Find out the relevant information and fill the table. How did you find details about your family's past? Did you rely on things like photographs, diaries, ID cards, or memories from your parents and relatives? Page 67. Think about it. Have you ever seen old coins, books, clothes, jewelry, or utensils in and around your house? What type of information can we gain from such objects, or from old houses or buildings? Here we have a picture of a boy with his grandmother. The boy is busy exploring and fascinated by old objects he discovered. Every object or structure tells a story and is like a piece in a jigsaw puzzle. The objects that you see around your house convey something of the history of your family. Similarly, we can put together historical events through a variety of sources, but keep in mind that in the case of history, quite a few pieces of the puzzle may remain missing. Observe the figure at the bottom of the page. It brings together the main sources of history. You do not need to remember them all now. We will use some of them as we go along. The picture here depicts the different sources of history, like archaeological sources, which covers excavations, human, animal, and plant remains, tools and weapons, figurines and ornaments, pottery and toys, habitations and burials. It also covers monuments and mounds. Then comes inscriptions, manuscripts, copper plates, coins, all a part of it. Then there are oral sources like genealogical or folklore. Then we move to artistic sources which cover paintings, sculptures, and panels. Also there are Vedas and Itihasas, which are a part of Indian literature, comprising of poems and plays, historical texts, collection of stories. Scientific and technological texts also are a part of this. Literary sources also take into account foreign accounts, which comprise of travelogues and historical chronicles. Page 68. When historians study, say, a king or queen of 1,500 years ago, an ancient monument, a war, or some items of trade, they take great care to gather information from as many sources as they can find and consult. Historian is a person who studies and writes about the past. Sometimes the sources confirm each other, the jigsaw pieces match. At other times, sources may give contradictory information. The jigsaw pieces don't match, in which case they need to decide which source they can trust more. That is how they try to recreate the history of the period they are studying. Who contributes to all these sources of history? Historians themselves, but also archaeologists, epigraphists who study ancient inscriptions, anthropologists who study human societies and their cultures, experts in literature and languages, and some more. In addition, in the last 50 years or so, scientific studies have been contributing more and more to the reconstruction of the past. For example, studies of ancient climates, chemical studies of excavated materials, and studies of the genetics of ancient people have provided fresh insights which supplement the more usual sources. Genetics is the branch of biology that studies how, in plants, animals, or humans, certain features and characteristics get passed down from one generation to the next. And when historians study recent history, which usually means the last 2 or 3 centuries, another source is newspapers. For the last few decades, electronic media, television, the internet, etc., can also be consulted. Let's explore. There are a few images of different sources of history on the next page. Who and what do you think the objects show? Write down in the boxes next to the images any information that you get from these objects. Page 69. Here we have a full page picture, a collage of few images of different sources of history. The picture shows an old coin, an architecture from some ancient temple, and an emblem. You are supposed to write who and what the objects show and represent. The blank space in the boxes is provided for your answers. Page 70. The beginnings of human history. Modern humans, or Homo sapiens, have walked the planet for about 3 lakh years. This appears to be a very long time, yet it is only a tiny fraction of the Earth's history. Let us have a quick look at our early history. We have a picture on the page that depicts this historical era. Early humans are shown here busy in different activities back in the day. Kids are also accompanying their families. Let's explore. In the above picture, look at some activities of early humans in a rock shelter. Which ones can you recognize? Give a brief description for each. Early humans faced many challenges from nature and lived in bands or groups to help each other. They were constantly seeking shelter and food and were mainly hunters and gatherers. This means that they relied on hunting and collecting edible plants and fruits for their survival. Our early ancestors also had certain beliefs about the natural elements and possibly also some notion of afterlife. Afterlife is a life that begins after death. Page 71. These groups lived in temporary camps, rock shelters, or caves and communicated with each other using languages that are now lost. They used fire and started making objects that made their lives easier, like improved stone axes and blades, arrowheads, and other tools. Aspects of their life are visible in rock paintings found in hundreds of caves all over the world. Some of those paintings depict simple figures or a few symbols. Others are more detailed and represent scenes with animals or humans. In time, these early humans learned to make simple ornaments such as stone or shell beads, pendants made of animal teeth, and sometimes exchanged them with other groups. The first crops. Over long ages, the Earth's climate has gone through many changes. At certain times it was very cold and much of the Earth was covered with ice. This is called an ice age, as you will learn in greater detail in science. Later, when the climate warmed up, this ice partly melted and the resulting waters swelled the existing rivers and eventually drained into the oceans. The last ice age lasted from over 100,000, that is 1 lakh years ago, to around 12,000 years ago. Afterwards, living conditions improved for humans. In many parts of the world, they started settling down and cultivating cereals and grains. They also domesticated animals such as cattle, goats, etc. With more food available, these communities grew in size and number and often settled down near rivers. This was not only because of the availability of water, but also because the soil would be more fertile there. It made the process of growing crops easier. Let's explore. Observe the scene on the next page. It depicts an agricultural community from a few millenniums ago. List the main activities you can identify. Page 72. On the top, we have a picture coming from all the way back a few millenniums ago. The picture shows the community involved in various agricultural activities like collecting the crops, feeding the cattle, preparing tools, cooking food, and some playful activities going on in the background. We also see some cattle grazing around near the riverside. Think about it. Both in this earlier picture of a rock shelter and in this one, men and women are given certain roles. While they may appear to be natural, they are not necessarily correct and do not cover all situations. For instance, in a rock shelter, women may have helped prepare colors for painting the rock or may have done some of the painting. In both scenes, men may have done some of the cooking or may have helped take care of children. Keeping in mind that we have only limited information, think about such roles and situations and discuss in class. Page 73. As communities grew, so did their social complexity. Leaders or chieftains were responsible for the well-being of the people, and everyone collectively worked towards the community's welfare. Welfare is health, prosperity, and well being. For example, there was no sense of individual ownership. The lands were collectively sowed and harvested. As time went by, hamlets grew into sizable villages that exchanged goods, mostly food, clothing, and tools. Hamlet is a small settlement or small village. Slowly, networks of communication and exchange were established among those villages, and some of them grew into small towns. New technologies appeared. For example, pottery for making pots and other clay objects, and the use of metal, copper first, iron later, which helped make durable tools, objects of daily use, and ornaments. We will see in Chapter 6 how this stage prepared for the emergence of what is called civilization. For now, it is important to remember that this early progress of humanity had to face many challenges. At some critical times, humanity could have almost disappeared, as some earlier species did. We will never know those early humans to whose courage and persistence we owe our existence today. Before we move on, we have explored some ways to learn more about our pasts. The concept of a timeline helps us understand the sequence of historical events at different times. There are different ways of measuring time: years, decades, centuries, millenniums. Sources of history are many. They help us reconstruct and interpret historical events. We have also had a brief look into the lives of early humans and how human societies grew more complex in time. Page 74. Questions, activities, and projects. 1. As a project, write the history of your family or village if you live in one, using sources of history at your disposal. Ask your teacher to guide you. 2. Can we compare historians to detectives? Give reasons for your answers. 3. A few exercises with dates. Place these dates chronologically on the timeline: 323 CE, 323 BCE, 100 CE, 100 BCE, 1900 BCE, 1900 BCE, 1090 CE, 2024 CE. If King Chandragupta was born in 320 CE, which century did he belong to? And how many years was that after the Buddha's birth? Rani of Jhansi was born in 1828. Which century did she belong to? How many years was that before India's independence? Turn 12,000 years ago into a date. 4. Plan a visit to a nearby museum. The visit should be prepared with some prior research on the kind of exhibits the museum holds. Keep notes during the visit. Write a brief report afterwards, highlighting what was unexpected or interesting or fun about the visit and the exhibits. 5. Invite to your school an archaeologist or a historian and ask them to speak on the history of your region and why it's important to know it. Chapter 4 ends here.
Exploring Society, India and Beyond. You were just listening to this audiobook. Textbook of Social Science for Class 6. Narration: Gaurav Marwaha. Sound recordist: Manju Kumari. Assistance in production: Muhammad Shamim Khan. Directed and produced by Vimlesh Chaudhary. This audiobook is presented to you by CIET NCERT, New Delhi, India.